Welcome to Stationery Test Drive with Inky Memo. I'm Samir.
This is Minjal.
And I'm Vishal. And today we'll be talking about pencils, specifically the Staedtler Mars Lumograph in two varieties, 6B and 4B. And therefore, let us dispense with all the to be or not to be jokes right now. But before we do anything else, Samir, tell us what you're working on.
I've been working on some figurative drawings. This is a series that started off as a 36 days of type project, and I've just been doing a series of figures that are intertwined with letters. And this has all been done with regular blue fountain pen.
But with pencils underneath, so we're on theme.
Yes, we're always on theme.
Minjal, you don't have what you're working on right now, but it's very exciting, and I can put in a picture in the video later. So tell us about that.
So I've been doing some research because we're actually coming out with some really exciting products on Inky Memo. So do keep following us on our website and our social media pages,
which is at Inky Memo
and inkymemo.com.
Right. By the time this comes out, I should hopefully have made headway on a little stream of consciousness comic. It's called Battalion. Right now there's just a couple of pages of pencils which are very light, and possibly I don't think they were done with Mars Lumographs, but these will be inked eventually. I don't know with what. But yeah, this is the kind of work I do, and if there are more pages that are done by the time this is out, they'll be up on the screen right now. So, let's get down to graphite.
So today we are talking about the Mars Lumograph, which I believe technically this is the Mars Lumograph 100. The blue pencils that look like this and are quite the classic design are the 100 series. And Staedtler does produce various other variations on this as well. The 100 series, which is the one you're looking at here, comes in 24 degrees, the grades that pencils come in. So all the way from 11H, I believe.
Now let's explain the scale for people who don't know. In the middle, there is a thing called the HB. And that's the thing we use mostly growing up in school. That's the most ubiquitous pen.
Right. So the HB is exactly on the center, is kind of the medium grade of pencil. The grades of pencils are called degrees, but I know most of us just call them grades or darkness or various other terms.
H is hard and B is brittle?
I guess so. I mean, maybe it's a non-English term that created...
Right. But conventionally it's always H and B. I haven't heard any other way of describing it.
Because the thing that most people don't realize about pencils is that it's not just graphite. So pencils are in some ways a solid form of paint, in that they have a pigment, which is the graphite, and a binder, which in the case of pencils is usually some sort of clay, or maybe now it's more artificial kind of...
So this is an industrial clay. This is not the kind of plasticine that you're using to make pots or terracotta or something. This is some kind of super fine earth material that's been milled down.
And I believe the French were the first ones to come up with this technique. So maybe the B is some sort of French term for soft.
Right. So H's have, I'm guessing, some kind of more waxiness to them. At least that's how it feels when you're using them.
So essentially the difference is in the proportion of graphite to clay. The harder the pencil, the more clay it has, and the softer the pencil, the more graphite it has. And HB is where they're kind of at an equal proportion, and those are good for writing, which we use, for regular writing.
You might remember in school that people would tell you to put down your sketches in 2H pencil because it would force you to have a very light line. As you grow up, you realize that light line is better served by using a softer pencil with a easier and softer application. Not something I've ever learned, which I think you will see in my work. I've never been able to put down a light sketch line. But yes, 2H, 3H, up to 11H, like you said, these are used more for precision, thin, light lines, maybe in industrial engineering drawing. And on the artistic side of things, because let's say while we are multi-talented, Samir and I do a lot of illustration, and we are going to be using these pencils for illustration today. Minjal does calligraphy, so she'll have a very interesting take on these. But yes, we mostly stick to 2B and up. I think most of my pencils, whether they're even mechanical leads that go into push pencils, they're 2B and up. I've actually not used 4B or 6B, and we'll get into that.
And Stedler, interestingly, we have a 6B here, which I used a bit of when we were testing it out, but Stedler goes all the way up to 12B.
I have a 10B somewhere. There's a big fat pencil that's really good for just laying down grey tones. And depending on the paper, we'll talk about papers as well. You can get quite a bit of range. So let's at least look. We've got these pencils on here. Let's look at the actual work we did. So Samir, show us your...
So the thing we're trying to do with this series is to test out each of these tools and see them from each of our points of views and the different kinds of work that we do. So this is what I came up with. I've clearly been in a figurative drawing mode recently. I used both the 4B and the 6B for this, the 6B for some of the darker areas.
I think you can really see the range of value, or in terms of layman's terms, in terms of black to grey, that you can get from these pencils.
Yeah, I mean, and you can see how much graphite is laid down. I think it's catching the light a little.
We can put an insert in later, or we'll even show it to you across now. But we'll do a scan later so people can really appreciate the details. That will be on screen now. So tell us about like, how do you get this? This is very textured, but that grey is very smooth. Then there are hard lines here. Are these all things that you can get with the same, like this pencil right here in this form, or do you need to sharpen it differently? How do you sharpen it? How do you treat this? Do you use just a box standard pencil sharpener? Tell us about it.
I think when you're doing looser drawings where you want kind of a line that's more organic, like in figure drawings, you actually don't need to sharpen things too much. Because as Vishal was saying earlier about laying down a very light line, you can kind of lay down a light line even with a very blunt tip on a pencil.
So that's just demonstrated on this piece of paper. Usually you would hold a pencil like you would. And this gives you not the hardest line ever, but there is a tip here that I can really control and put down. And at the same time, I'm guessing you even use it this way, where you... And see there, you're really getting a lot of the texture there.
So yeah, a pencil it's the reason it's so ubiquitous. It is a very variable and very adjustable medium.
And many artists recommend holding it this way. I don't do that because I just, I'm used to a certain way of working.
And also I think the sort of painterly way of holding a pencil really works if you're working on a much larger scale.
Yes.
But if you're
for
doing
finer things, I do enjoy working at this size, and you can get, like, look here, you can get quite a bit of mark making variety here without. And can you, now that I put this down, I think here especially you can see that it's gone quite dark, but there's an under layer of grey. Is that done by layering?
Yes, I think especially when we're using softer pencils like the 4B or the 6B, it's very easy, not just easy, but sometimes essential to layer things rather than just try to put down the darkest shade in a single layer.
Right, so you get a gradation here, and then you can use your finger, or you can use like a blending stump or something to get that real smooth thing. You didn't do any of that in this, though.
No, because I wanted the texture of the paper to show through. This is a bit of a rough cartridge paper, so I like that look.
So on the other end of what you can do with something like this, Minjal, why don't you show us what you have?
So I went all out and just decided to have fun with the pencils. I've used a 2B and a 4B, tied them with rubber bands.
That's interesting.
And as you can see, I've actually managed to get like these really fine lines.
Oh, okay.
And the thicker line with the 4B, which I wanted to get a little shadow, which worked with the 4B. And I was thinking this would also be a great way to teach, calligraphy to kids. I conduct workshops, and this I thought would be a fun way to kind of get them started.
So if I'm understanding this right, you just put these two together, and the gap between the two of them forms this exact width.
So
for calligraphy.
I had to obviously stick to the principles, which is hold the pencils at a 45-degree angle.
Show us that grip, because we aren't used to it as artists.
So what you do is again hold it at 45.
Okay.
And then you get a stroke like this, which is a thin stroke and thick stroke together.
Wow.
Or say something like this.
What about these really fine bits? Those are a single pencil?
No, that would again be the same technique.
And how do you taper to a point?
You taper it, and then yes, you cheat a little, and then you just round off the edges.
Okay.
Which is something you can't do in a regular calligraphy pen in most cases.
Yes,
so that's actually a great cheat.
Yeah, I mean, I really like this bit where it overlaps. It gives it a very different look than pen flat.
Well, I have to be honest. This is the first time I tried this out, and this has been, say, my 50th attempt at getting the A's right.
I think it looks great. I think you should do more experiments with this double setup. I think Staedtler should start selling a kit where it just, maybe not rubber bands, but maybe some kind of 3D printed part that makes the two sit together at various levels.
Yeah, that would be interesting, especially since they have the light and the darker grades. It helps with smudging, the shadow effect. So this is something that I'm also going to now try with Urdu and maybe Arabic calligraphy as well.
That would be really great, because Urdu and calligraphy lend themselves to more flowing letter forms. Leave a comment if you'd like to see Minjal demonstrate some of this. Maybe on a future episode we can do a little test drive part 2, just trying out these various things.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Okay, so
Vishal, what do you have?
I went a little overboard by attempting a bit too much shading, I would say. This is mine.
Wow. Okay, that's
So,
really nice.
So this is 4B and 2B. There is a underdrawing. It's technically cheating, I suppose, with my mechanical pencil, which is a 0.7 Pentel. I think it's a 2B nib, but again, that is for just a very light precision line. You can see some of these things because I did not do a preliminary sketch or anything. It's just I was figuring out the pose as I went along, so parts of this were drawn later. But I think it's mostly, I don't even remember what particular one I was using for the most part. I think I did a light layer about that value of 6B for a lot of these things, then went in with a blending stump, which is just a piece of, you can even use a piece of tissue or a piece of like rough cardboard or something, and just like, and then I went earbuds, yeah, and then I think I went back in with the 4B for this like textured line. That's, I think, a hard press on one of these, and you can get a lot of value in this range. A lot of this is layering, so it will be like one under layer and then a second layer to get that texture in and like really separate those highlights from that. But at the same time, you can use it very graphically with just like a single stroke and pulling that to get textural bits. I really enjoyed it. I have not really drawn in this style before. I've done a bit of pencil work. I did pencils on a children's book, which you can get. I'll link it to it in the description. And that was done, that was really a case of necessity being the mother of invention. I used an Apsara Extra Dark, which we might cover in the future. It does not have a B or an H rating, but I would say it's closer to a 2B. And it has a decent value range, but a lot of it depends on the paper. That project, I did not have either the time to put in as much effort and into the value and shading, nor did I really even know how to. So that ended up a lot grayer, but it was going to be colored, so it wasn't a problem. And that one was done on much more cheap and paper that I could get at the time from a local store. It was not I was not in the position to source high quality art, even of this quality. This is like a 180 or so GSM cartridge paper. I think this is the same one, right?
Yeah, I think it's the same paper.
Okay, so it's slightly ivory, it's quite rough, so it takes well to things like this. If you watched our other episode on the Pilot Parallel Pen, which you can find on our channel, you'll see that there the paper fought against our work, at least against my work, and I can show you that just as like a sneak peek of what we did in that episode.
Yeah,
So that's a pen on the same paper. So as I was saying, the parallel pen, this is done with the parallel pen, which you can see an entire video about this. It's on our channel. In this case, this is the same paper, but it really fights you because the parallel pen requires as flat a surface as possible. In this case, that grain, that unevenness works in your favor because it catches all the little ups and downs and divots in the things, and the graphite really goes in there. So yeah, that's I would suggest, as long as you pick a good paper, as long as you get and it might work with a smooth paper like a Bristol board or something like that, but you're really not getting the full range that you would get from a rough cartridge paper like this. So even a natural paper would be great, a watercolor paper.
I think smooth papers can also have a great effect with pencils like this, but it will be a very different one.
Yeah, you're not going to get that really nice interplay of rough and line that you get with this. You will get a much smoother thing, and maybe you want that. Maybe you want these very polished, almost airbrush like pencils.
I think the thing that will be complicated by smooth paper is, for example, if you look at these areas that I worked on, you don't actually have to try too hard to mix in the different strokes that you're putting in, because the gradation of the paper takes care of that mixing.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was a perfectly smooth paper, then you would have to make sure that you don't overshade a particular area.
It's almost like working against a mortar or a grinding stone, where it falls into those gaps and it fills them up in a more even way. Whereas if you were working on a smooth paper, it would be too smooth. So all your imperfections of putting lines down would then show finally. It's
right.
But in calligraphy, I think a nice clean line and this rubber band technique is something that people should definitely try. What other uses do you see for this other than just drawing and calligraphy? Has anyone written longhand with these things? Or
before we tried this experiment, and honestly before seeing Minjal's work, I would have thought that these were not the best writing instruments, and that the Mars Lumograph pencils were more kind of shading artist pencils rather than writing. But the kind of line quality you're getting here, I think there is something to be said for experimenting with just writing with it.
Yeah, I do like lettering with, like obviously everyone just writes their name and I do that. But you get a lot of,
line variation.
Yeah.
It's almost like using one of those flexible nib fountain pens.
Yes, like a Fudenosuke pen, which we will cover in an upcoming episode for sure, because it's one of our favorite pens. And this is going to be one of my favorite pencils. This is the first work I've done of this type. I did not think I was capable of it, frankly, because I've now not really done this kind of work, this kind of level of shading, and it reminds me a lot of, maybe it's just the subject matter as well, but it reminds me a lot of concept art that I used to see back in the 80s and 90s before Photoshop and Procreate and all of those took over, where cartoon concept art was shaded like this. It was not just a clean cell look.
Right. So, Minjal, most of your work has always been with a pen. What has been your experience of trying to do something finished with a pencil? Because I know your use of a pencil usually would have been just to do construction lines and things like that.
So I think a lot of calligraphers are experimenting with different mediums, using them in their finished pieces. So this is actually given me the confidence to actually also make final pieces with just a pencil, which you correctly said is used as drafting a drafting medium. And I think it'll also be a good experiment to teach kids calligraphy in this manner. Because otherwise it can be a little intimidating for them to jump straight to fountain pens.
Right.
So the pencils may also be a good medium for them to start out with.
Something they can be comfortable with.
Yeah.
And also there's the use of non-standard grips, like the way many artists use them, which is sort of like that, and then you whittle these down or expose the graphite more with a blade rather than a sharpener. I think you could do some very interesting calligraphy things with that.
Yeah.
So I think that is all we can cover today for this. The most important question, of course, is Staedtler or Faber-Castell? And I know the answer. Mine is Apsara because I'm Indian and Nataraj.
I think that's a religious war we don't need to get into until
they are actually in the same town.
Yes.
It's a very strange thing, but they're the two biggest, or at least certainly the two most well-known pencil manufacturers in the world. It's sort of like DC and Marvel. They both kind of jointly hold a lot of the technological copyrights because they're old enough now and they're kind of reached a truce of how they make things. And so yeah, I mean, I know that growing up, both those names had a pedigree to them. Staedtler and Faber-Castell. You'd look for the nice yellow pencils or the blue pencils, or and of course closer to home here in India we have Nataraj, who has these nice red pencils. And now a whole range of them. We are going to look at some very interesting Nataraj pencils in the future, which are, if I can find them, they're blue and red. And that's not just the paint on the top. We'll talk about that in the future episodes, so stay tuned for that. But before we go, let's just tell you, the viewer, about what we're doing and where you can find us. You can find me at allvishal, ALLVISHAL, on most social media and on allvishal.com. Samir?
You can find me at Samir Bharadwaj on Twitter and Instagram, and also samirbharadwaj.com.
Minjal?
You can find me on Minjal Kadakia on Twitter and Instagram. And minjalkadakia.com is my website.
And you can find all of these links in the description below, as well as links to all the other things that we've talked about. If you've missed anything, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, ring the bell, subscribe to the Inky Memo newsletter, because as fun as these videos are, Samir and Minjal go very much in depth and geeky into stationary things. I don't think they've covered the Staedtler and Faber-Castell story yet, but maybe in a future installment. It comes out once a month. It's not going to be spamming you a lot, so enjoy that. Enjoy the rest of these episodes. We'll be putting them out weekly for as long as we can, as long as we can find new and interesting stationary stories and stationary things to test drive. And if there's a piece of stationery, whether it's a pencil, a pen, a random thing that you would like us to cover, and if we can get a hold of it, then absolutely we'll cover it. And so let us know in the comments, reach out to us. We always want to hear from you. And I think that's it. So I usually do this sign off, but Samir, what do we do with all our stationery?
Use that stationery.